What's up guys, in this video I'll be reviewing the newest Wilson Clash 100 V2 and comparing it to the previous version and other rackets alike. The Wilson Clash 100 is a racket created to combine the likes of something that is arm friendly but also possesses true power capabilities with some decent control built in. Traditionally, tennis rackets are made with characteristics that are either on one of the extremes of power and stiffness or flexible and controlled. Then there are those in between that don't specialize in either or but kind of do a little bit of everything. For this review, like the E-Zone, since I don't have a good review on the Clash 100, I'll review it from both perspectives of a new buyer, but I'll try to point out as many differences as I possibly can for the previous users as well. Just a quick disclaimer, I bought this racket brand new from Wilson's official site, not paid or sponsored, so if you like the content, simply liking the video helps in every single way, and subscribe if you want to see more content. I decided to set up a buy me a coffee page. I don't currently have any additional features out there like payments to consultation or anything, as I already respond to all questions and comments in as much detail as I can, even though I do work a normal full-time job. So if you would like to support me in any additional way, you can visit the link below, but none of that is necessary at all. I'm very appreciative of all the support and comments that I get every video, and I'll still continue to devote my time helping the community as much as I can. Rackets are not cheap and are getting even more expensive, so I think it's more important for people to get as much information as possible to make the best decision with your hard-earned money. So without further ado, let's move on to the specs. Not much, if anything, has changed from the V1 to the V2 models for the Clash 100. It is still obviously a 100 square inch racket, but don't make the mistake of buying this racket thinking it has the new 1620 pattern, as the 100 model still has the 1619 pattern as the previous generation. It will only be included on the Clash Pro and the Clash 98, which is a little bit silly and something I didn't think would differ upon my purchase, but still I preferred the lighter model, so I have some space to move with customization, as it's also the most popular version anyway, so it's probably the best for me to review. Also, no ETA for the Clash 98 to be released yet in Australia unfortunately, but when it comes out I'll try to get on that one too. So here, a swing weight averaging around 312 according to Tennis Warehouse's average stock specs, a beam width of 24.5mm all around, which is really quite thick, and the only difference has been an increase in stiffness RA rating from around 55 of the V1 to 57 of the V2. For string setups and modifications, here I used 3 different string setups all at different tensions to see what the differences were in slight tension adjustments. In stock form, I received a racket that was most importantly a swing weight of 299. That meant that I had to customize the racket by adding about 8 grams of lead to 10 and 2 o'clock, plus a 5 gram overgrip, which is pretty general, which brought my unstrung weight to 305 grams. The swing weight then became 311 and 9 points headlight, which is roughly closer to the average specs provided by Tennis Warehouse. This setup is the one that I used the most and is probably the closest to what you would receive in stock form if you got a normal spec racket. So for feel and stiffness, this is going to be the most detailed section because this is where I noticed the most change. So unlike the Clash V1, a word of warning, yes, it is very much possible to get a slight arm soreness with the Clash V2 if you use the wrong string setup or tension. I did get a late night soreness in my forearm after a night session, as I used Polyon, which is extremely stiff, and the Solstice Power stringing at 50 pounds, which is slightly above my normal tension range, even though Solstice Power, I consider it to be fairly soft compared to the majority of Volleys on the market. The after effects were felt, but I recovered after my sleep, at least indicating to me that it's not too bad at the very least. Just note that this whole thing about arm soreness was me intentionally using strings and tensions out of my norm to test if it would be a problem or not. So if you have no problems with your current string setups and you bring them over to the Clash V2, I find it highly unlikely that it will be any worse if you transition to this racket. So to get this straight, it's not a stiff racket by any means, but just don't make bad decisions with your setup. Playing with a higher tension or stiffer poly will help counteract some of those criticisms people didn't enjoy from the feel, but again you have to decide whether that affects your arm health or not. But the criticisms for the V1 in terms of feel I think are less prevalent for the V2 if my judgment is correct. To me, the V1 felt like it was more airy and cloud-like when making contact with the ball, and added to that was the feeling like the racket was bending or flexing a lot, which provided a very delayed release of the ball, which is a reason why I think people could not gel with the Clash originally, because it created such a unique feel that you either loved or hated it. In any sense, it was an acquired taste and you absolutely needed some time to adjust to it. The V2 on the other hand, I don't think really needed an adjustment for me. It seems to feel a little bit more closer to what you would expect other normal modern day flexible rackets to be like. Though I did test it out next to the V1, I personally like the change. To me, it seems they made the similar changes towards the feel as they did with the newer blade, producing a similar result when changing the composition or the layup of the racket. So now it seems that it has become more crisp or direct and faster off the strings and slightly stiffer. There seems to be less of a delay coming off the string bed compared to the Clash, much like what they did when they updated the Blade V7 to the V8. Do not get it twisted though, the 57 stiffness rating that the Clash has is not a traditional 57 from the old school frames. It feels more like a 60 to me and sometimes low 60s. How does that make sense exactly? Well, the looser you are and the smoother you swing at the ball through contact, the feeling of the flexibility comes through more and the ball pocketing is enhanced. The same is true if you go for heavier spin shots whilst the racket is more angled during contact. But if you load up and swing really hard directly behind the ball for a put away or slap shot, the frame significantly firms up a lot more and does not have as much flex. Think of what the Luxilon Smart String aimed to do. That's basically what the Clash does. It's not new to the V2 though, it also happened for the V1, but I don't think the V1 firmed up as much in my estimation. Likewise with the Blade V8, if you string on the lower end of what you normally string, then you'll start to become a little more in tune with the previous generation. But if you string exactly how you normally do, then the slight differences will be more enhanced. So if you really like this new paint job and you prefer the feel of the V1, I would suggest stringing a little bit lower so that you can get a similar feel. Yes, there is some sensation of it being muted, but not as much as the V1. I also found that removing the dampener balanced out the muted feel and actually made it very enjoyable to hit with a nice amount of feedback. I rarely ever remove dampeners, and even with rackets like the V7 Blade or the EZO 98 2022, that I think you probably should remove it if you have the issues with feel. For those rackets, I still keep my dampener on. I mainly use dampeners to make the contact feel a little bit more solid and smooth and quiet some of the pinging sensations. Though there is no benefit to dampeners and it's just a feel preference, here it did not give any additional pinging vibrations that I usually dislike. It maintained its smooth soft feel with solid contact and actually reminded me of what it felt like playing with an Angel TC100 or a low stiffness Pro Stock Babolat with a dampener. If you normally don't use a dampener though, then you'd probably need some kind of stiffer string to offset this. Either a firm shaped poly or a traditional style poly like Lynx Tour, Alu Power, 4G, Cyclone or Pro Hurricane. The Clash is not a racket you want to be feeling arm issues with though. If you do have significant issues, then probably consider the V1. But if you do have any kind of these issues with either of them, you need to get that checked out. I'd be less worrying about your equipment and more concerned about either improving your technique or strengthening and rehabbing. For power, call me crazy, but the increase of stiffness I'm pretty sure has provided a slight enhancement in power potential. I do remember using the V1 and trying to blast numerous shots as hard as I could, and although still powerful, I do not remember getting this amount of power on my all-out swings as I do with the V2, with or without modifications. The constant beam 24.5mm all around obviously helps in this area, but being stiffer in general is also normally a key contributor to power generation. Albeit it is a small change in the stiffness rating, but that number may not tell the whole story, since as I mentioned, it can definitely feel stiffer than those numbers suggest on big swipes. Also, the more direct response of the string bed and the speed off the strings, with it being less delayed, are also likely helping. Now imagine bringing your specs to 320 to 330 swing weight like most intermediate rackets are, and maybe where the Clash 100 Pro is around. As long as you produce a similar amount of racket head speed, just think about the extra plow through and power potential this racket can provide, given the base power is so high. If the same holds true with the Clash 100 Pro V2, I'd say this is truly the closest thing you're going to get to pure drive power, but with a low stiffness rating, and likely you only need minimal customizations with the Clash Pro. Despite such a powerful setup and open string pattern, the racket provides very adequate control, more than you'd really expect from such a racket of its category. The change up between flex and ball pocketing to a firmer response when you swing harder I think really complements this. If you don't gel with the racket because of its feel or it's too muted, I can understand that you might not be able to optimize the control of the racket. That's typically because of the lack of trust and confidence you have with your equipment, which is a totally legitimate reason and makes perfect sense. But please do not tell me that this racket lacks control. Sure, it's no precision machine if you're going to compare it to pure control rackets, but personally I found no issues hitting just as many spots as with all my other rackets, provided I trust my swing and swing with confidence. The slight changes to the string bed response, as mentioned, also will help with precision and targeting. I personally believe there is a slight improvement to the precision over the V1 since the V1 was much more delayed. But you know, this may not be the case of the racket itself, but a preferred feel that provides me more with confidence, so perhaps take that with a grain of salt. Really, flat shots do lose out on control a little bit more, but unlike the E-zone I just reviewed, I find it a lot easier to change from heavy topspin to flattening on a dime with much less effort. Where on the E-zone I had to focus a little bit more on my swing on contact, and this is likely due to the extra forgiveness of a true tweener from this clash, whereas the E-zone is more like a modern day advanced racket and less forgiving. Lastly, and just quickly, maintaining depth is absolutely effortless, and this is mainly due to the combination of power, spin and the launch angle. For me, maneuverability is probably going to be the highly subjective topic for a racket like this, and it all depends on your stroke style, swing weight and strength levels. Since the frame is super thick all around, racket head speed will be deterred by the thick edges dragging through the air more. This is also typically why I prefer this racket in a lighter weight range and not to go with the Clash Pro straight off the bat, which is a shame why they did not also include the 1620 pattern. Even if it's a minimal change as people have suggested, I still would have preferred that extra cross for a racket with this kind of power. Increasing the overall weight along with the thickness of the beam will inevitably slow down my swing speed for my swing style. For rackets like my Gravity Pro, Pure Strike or Blade, my weight and swing weights can be increased as they are relatively thinner and more aerodynamic, and in most cases the thinner the racket is, the more weight you'll need to correct the stability and power. So if you are really strong with a speedy and full swing, or if you have a shortened, abbreviated and efficient stroke style, then it becomes less of a deterrent, and typically rackets in this nature you will not need as much of a full swing like some Bluelights due to the high power potential the racket possesses. Spin potential is quite monstrous even in stock swing weight. You'll see later how much kick I can generate from this racket on a court surface that isn't quite high bouncing. Spin penetration is more noticeable here even than rackets like the E-zone or V-Core 98, since the Clash is a thick 100 square inch racket. So other spin rackets like the Extreme Tour Pure Aero VS or Dunlop SX Tour 98 are more comparable in this case. But the Clash V2 being so much more arm friendly in comparison, the lesser aerodynamic build is a fantastic trade-off for long-term arm health with comparable spin capabilities. As for launch angle, it is extremely high as you can imagine, but not uncontrollable in any way if you hit with good topspin. As long as you aggressively cut through the ball, you can easily bring the ball back down, which is how you maintain the most amount of control with this racket. Slice is surprisingly better than I thought it would be, likely due to the spin potential, and since it's light you can really lay into the ball quite easily, and it makes for good offensive and defensive slices. On neutral or offensive balls it was very easy to come underneath the ball aggressively, and on defensive balls it wasn't too difficult to block and neutralize to recover positioning, even when balls were higher pace. With that extra forgiveness it really helps for defense as well. Just be sure to give it a good knife, since it's lightweight. It's the best thing that you can do, as you might not be so lucky with guiding slices if you're not ripping into the ball yourself, and that's when you'll probably experience the open string pattern and the floating slices. Serve, as a result of the changes in feel, made it seem like a definite improvement to me. The V1, I just remember it took a lot longer to adjust to for the targeting, and even with that it didn't produce enough pace and stock swing weight. The extra flex and the ball pocketing made it harder to hone in on the precise targets, and I definitely did not hit as big of a serve with it as I do with the V2. On the other hand, I don't think I had any adjustment period with the V2. I felt right at home serving with it. The targeting felt much more natural, again due to the crisper and more direct response, but also the power I was able to generate along with the accuracy made it just as easy to serve with as the E-zone 98. I played doubles competition my first night trying this racket in my least preferred string setup and way under spec swing weight, and on that night I still hit my slider with ease, even acing 3 times on my second serve because I was that confident. Flat serves were slightly iffy due to the lack of stability and plow to begin with, but at the time I didn't know the swing weight was super low, and once I brought it up to more normal levels it did everything I wanted exactly how I wanted. Even with kick serves, not playing on a hard court and a surface that typically doesn't give me much freebie on spin, I was able to get most of my second serves to kick up and outwards off the bounce. For forgiveness, for a long time now I've not played with any truly user-friendly racket, which is those 100 square inch rackets that have a thick beam and a high stiffness rating. My Gravity Pro has obviously got a huge sweet spot, but it needs a solid swing weight, otherwise it becomes flimsy. It will become more demanding over the course of a session. My Pure Strike is probably the closest thing that I have to easy power, good control and spin, but the feel is garbage. As for Pure Drives and Pure Errors, I have not used them for so long due to my concerns of the stiffness, although I think I could play very well with them if not for them jarring my wrist. The Clash V2 is providing me with tons of forgiveness. You can barely feel a miss hit off the strings like the Gravity, although you might need to add some weight to get it to twist less on off-center shots, but it will produce effective balls even off slightly framed balls and still land in. With all the advanced style rackets that I've been using in recent years, I thought that the EZO 98 was way easier to use than most rackets that I've been playing with, but after playing with this and going back to the E-Zone, I actually found that it was a glaring contrast that the EZO 98 was a lot more difficult. And this is just a byproduct of most of the rackets that I review generally do happen to be the more advanced model, but typically a thick frame does not suit my swing style. It just goes to show that if you adapt your technique and give it enough time, there are so many good rackets out there that you can play with that you probably don't even think that you'd like. For stability, from my current playtest is probably where it didn't magically improve in any drastic ways. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to your swing weight and static weight, so I think the changes are less notable despite what the marketing says. For me, reviews without disclosing the specs can be a hit or miss because it will totally change the whole experience of a racket for better or worse, and that's why I always try to provide my specs, and not only that, but if it's under spec, I try to customize it as close as I can to the manufacturer's stock specs. So firstly, in true stock form, with a very under-spec swing weight and warm-up rally pace, it was fine on every stroke, but in full speed play, the swing weight was too low when attempting a modern forehand swing style. The ball literally died 9 times out of 10 halfway down the net for me. And that's because the stability was not enough at this weight to hold firm during contact when flipping the racket this aggressively. So what I had to resort to was a more traditional style swing where I looped around and behind the ball, more like Andre Agassi's forehand, and from that point on, I was able to hit every ball clean with good pace and spin. When I increased my swing weight to a normal stock type level, then I no longer had the issues doing a modernized swing path. The stability was nothing special, but it's decent enough to get away with in true stock form as long as you swing properly. If you lack plow through, power and stability, then you need to increase the weight. What I noticed is that on well-timed shots flush in the center of the racket was able to hold up quite well and did not shake that much on offensive shots. On defense, however, it was a little less stable, but only if the ball was really heavy. Outside the center was just a ton of instability. Much like my general recommendation, if you really rely on the stability and weight of the racket to do the work for you, I suggest you go with the Pro if it's not too heavy for you. Otherwise, you definitely need to customize this one up to a more desired weight. For volleys, I found the lack of stability really showed more so at the net for the V2 than it did for the V1. I distinctly remember a standout stroke was the stability on the volleys. For the V1, I thought it was actually very good in stock form contrary to popular opinion, and I enjoyed it for its stability on the volleys even though it was so light because it was also really maneuverable as well. Here, I think the volley stability was not so great for me anyway. Definitely a lot more shake and twisting than I remember from the previous version, and this is also an inclusion of the extra weight I added, and I found that I had to really focus more on centering the volleys for this generation than I did in the previous one. So who's this racket for? Again, if you're not experienced with feeling out minute changes between generations, you don't really need to get this one unless you just love the way it looks. Also, currently all V1s should be on a good discount, but even if this is your first Clash you're going to try, definitely demo because there's likely a bigger adjustment period with the V1 than the V2. But really, don't get some kind of perception that these rackets are not made for a wide range of players just because no popular pro endorses them. This isn't just a racket made for beginner or intermediates only. This is clearly evident given the sheer number of players on the ATP and WTA who use Era Pro drives, Pure drives, E-Zone or V-Core 100s, Wilson Steams, and now people are adopting the Pure Era VS. The list goes on. Even Dominic Thiem uses a Pure Strike that is listed as stiffer than the retail version towards the 70 stiffness mark. Do you really think he needs any more power than he can already generate? Don't you think he would need more feel and control? But yes, on a different topic, that is probably why he ended up needing to get wrist surgery in the first place. My point is just because a racket makes life easier for you doesn't mean that it's any less of a racket suited for advanced players. There are so many WTA pros that are so much better than all of us who still opt in for these rackets because they want the extra advantage for free that they don't have to generate themselves. Why work harder when you can work smarter? Imagine being able to play with the many qualities of a pure drive: easy power, easy spin, super forgiving, lightweight, adequate control that has room to move if you need to obtain more stability, plow, but that does not generally damage your long-term health. If you don't have your youth and athleticism like you used to, or you have pre-existing injuries to your arm or shoulder problems due to your age from tennis, gym, or physical jobs, then this racket is a great consideration. If you want an even softer feel, probably little less power than the previous generation could be a better choice. And if you need the ease of use of a racket, or you just want the extra freebies to enhance every aspect of your game, I'd highly recommend demoing beforehand, as it may still be a case of love-hate between some people, but if anything, this seems to be slightly less of an issue with the Clash V2 versus the V1. If the new string pattern on the Pro or 98 does enhance any sort of directional control which you feel that you may need, probably take a jab at those models. Hopefully the 98 comes out soon here, and I'll try to review that too. Since the Clash's introduction to the market in 2019, it has been a welcome innovation in today's market, whether you like it or you hate it. What I think it has done due to its success on the market, forced many of its competitors to switch up their racket lines to include more arm-friendly and feel-focused rackets. Thanks to the Clash, I think it has done wonders for the racket industry in general. What seemed to be a bleak offering just a few years back has now turned into quality all around. Regardless of the brand you choose, there is definitely something for every type of player. Maybe it's just that I'm less racket sensitive these days and I can play with many different models with percentage differences, or maybe it really just is that the racket is that easy to play with. But in my opinion, this is a very good racket to begin with, and with slight enhancements here, they made it just enough better than the last version. Can I say it's worth an immediate upgrade? I wouldn't personally recommend it given the cost of rackets these days, but if those bablets are wreaking havoc on you and you need something to consider that performs just as well, I would say give this one a shot. And so that concludes my review on the Wilson Clash 100 V2. Be sure to stay until the end to check out my ratings and racket summary. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.